Hello, hello, and more hello. Alright, there we are. There we are. Wait, why am I in front? Weird. Weird. Hang on. There we go. That looks better. So, first, announcement time. Announcement time. So, usually, I would be hosting Celestia or trying to organize everyone to start fairly soon. But unfortunately, I cannot run Celestia tonight. Two of the people in Celestia came down sick. So, Real Venom and Lazy Kuma were sick. So, unfortunately, that meant with Lily out, we were down to two people, Honeydew and Coffee and Doggos. Sorry, my brain fritzed out. So, we decided, well, I pinged everyone, and we collectively decided to take tonight off. However, since I do host these, I wanted to do some sort of stream. So, here we are. Oh, and I do have music. Let's start the music. I don't have anything planned. I could play some games, but it's late. It's late. I'm not really up to having a game to play at 8 o'clock. It's very odd. Unless it's a relaxing game like Minecraft, I don't usually play it or anything after a stream. So, yeah, that's where we are. So, I decided we're gonna do some Kami Storytime. I meant to do this for a while. But I mentioned it before. I have a story that I call Guardians of the Stars. So, I was thinking I might tell, the history as part of the story, but I feel like I need a primer. Something to give you some basis about what's going on. So, that's what I want to do tonight. It probably won't be a super long stream unless you guys start asking me questions. If you ask a lot of questions, I'll keep going. That's basically how this is gonna work. But, yeah, that's what I want to do tonight. I'm trying to figure out where I want to start. Give me 1 second. Taking care of some stuff in the background. It's so much easier when I'm, being able to take turns talking. Because I'm trying to arrange things for the next couple of weeks. Sorry. Listen to the music. I'll be back in a second. focused in. But, alright. So I've taken care of it. So primer. I think I talked about some of this initially, but the world of Guardians of the Stars is a little different than ours. It is meant to be somewhat in our lifetime. There are 3 eras. The first era is the closest to us. It is where we finally go out and start to colonize our system. That happens in the setting around 2070. So, conceivably our lifetime, but about 50 years off. Because unless Elon gets going really quick, I think it's going to take a little while. So, I set it to be around 2070. And I think I actually have, historical timeline. Alright. Well, the initial space elevator being built is 2041 in my setting. So, not quite 2070, but things kind of pop off in 2070 because space travel, at least in our system, becomes common enough that some people can do it. However, because the first space elevator is built in Singapore, China has the main influence over it. So, eventually, and I think somewhere I have a date for it, but I don't see it. Eventually, the EU and the US cooperate on another orbital tether, and I want to say it's in Africa. There's like 3 cities. I actually did the research. There's 3 cities around the world that are close enough to the equator that they'd be good for an orbital tether. So, that's basically how it is. I think one is in South America, but it's been a little while. I remember the one in Africa was my second choice. Singapore actually makes a really good choice, which seems kind of strange, but maybe that's just me. But, so, from there, in 2071, hence why I said 2070, a group of radicals, kind of fed up with how things were going on Earth, they steal a type of transport. I created the name of the class in Chinese. It is the Pneumon. I've never said it out loud, but they're a type of transport. And I actually have stats and things for these. But it's a type of freighter. It's kind of like what we tend to see in like early space movies. You know, a cylinder, engines on each inch. That way, they don't have to flip the ship. That will come up in my stories a lot. Because my vessels actually do follow some hard and fast rules. But part of it spins to have gravity for the crew. At least some of the time. Not when they're doing like command functions. Those are still done in 0G. But you can live in relative like half G gravity because of the spin gravity. They weren't armed, not usually at least. That would be strange, especially early on when we're talking about. This one, in fact, was never initially armed. However, the radicals filled the transport full of people, about 1,000 people, and they head to Ceres. Ceres is one of the biggest planetoids. It's actually bigger than Pluto, and it's in the asteroid belt. But it's been used as, well, in the setting at least, it's used as the headquarters basically for mining activities in the asteroid belt. And it has a dedicated facility there, run by a Japanese company. I mean, not Japanese, Chinese company, called Beijing. And when they get there, they convince the employees already there to side with them, and they declare their independence from Earth. The company in particular gets very mad about this, and as one of the only groups to have armed vessels, which is basically a cut-down version of the frigate. I mean, wow. Okay, I said that totally wrong. A cut-down version of the transport. The U.S. created what was called the Tiger Missile Frigate. They were designed to launch kind of like an enhanced version of a Sidewinder, meant to fly through space and take out like transport vessels or satellites, and do so pretty much anywhere in the system, or at least that was the hope. But they're half as long as a normal transport because they drop the engines on the front. To add a missile launcher, it only fires up to 12 missiles at a time. But that's kind of a lot. So, they talk the US into sending their frigates out. And the people on Ceres, the radicals, if you want to call them that, they went and armed their single transport, and they had a couple of transports. It wasn't just one, because there were a couple at Ceres. So, they started arming their ships, but only one was ready when the Tiger frigates were sent out. So, Ceres sends the captain who originally stole the transport out to defend their independence. And in the end, using creative tactics, they do it. they do it. They fend off both missile frigates that are sent. In fact, the only missile frigates to exist. So, that is where that comes. However, I should probably call it by name. They call their vessel Discovery, in homage to the Space Shuttle Discovery. But they didn't cripple either of the frigates. They just fended them off, damaging them some, but repairable, and they could get back to Earth. So the frigates start to return, and then they find that the Chinese and a group of companies had invested in their own frigate design, but they only had one. However, it was not this sort of half a transport with no armor. It was actually armored, intended for combat, and fitted with, a full array of weapons, defensive and missile-oriented. So, they send out this frigate to convince the U.S. frigates to go fight Ceres again, and they'd go with them. However, the Discovery slips through, and they get close enough to Earth that they can broadcast a message all over the world, saying that if, Earth will leave them alone, that they won't do anything against Earth. Basically, gunship diplomacy. Well, the Kanju, which is the name of the Chinese-built frigate, their crew is told the Discovery must die. So, they go out and fight the Discovery. However, the U.S. frigates decide to side with the Discovery. They'd had some conversations during the initial fight, and, the way this was handled seemed wrong to them, so they end up siding with Ceres. In the three-way battle, unfortunately, both U.S. Frigates are crippled, and the Discovery is damaged, but they do defeat the Kanju. However, this leads into a period where the corporate coalition, which wants their assets back that they were making money off of in space, get fed up. Sorry. They get fed up with the government's not being as aggressive as they want. So, they end up fighting sort of a war. It's called the Corporate War, because this group of companies were big enough, they decided to take on nations. It spreads across the globe, because, at this point, space travel is a thing. So, you can end up flying something all the way to any country on the planet to drop off troops or weapons. This actually takes about 10 years to settle out. The world is not looking so great during that time, but it does mean that Ceres got left alone. Now, when they left, they took a lot of hydroponics and other goods so they could actually set up an independent colony. However, they would actually go back to Earth to rescue some more people during that time period. Because, 10 years is a lot of time to send ships. So they do rescue some more people, and they increase the size of their colony. Mars also has a little colony, and with the help of Ceres, they start to be independent on their own too. So that's the first time period. After this is the start of what I call the Interstellar Space Era. Mostly because Mars builds a massive shipyard in orbit over their planet. I mean, they kind of need to. No one else is building ships. Ceres doesn't have a good place to build ships. Since you need a gravity well for some types of circuitry and such, you can't do it all in 0G or spin gravity, which is what Ceres basically has. So Mars starts building large ships, transports basically, but it brings in a new era of space travel. They also, on Ceres, they develop the first functional fusion torch drive. It's far more efficient than all the early drives that, we were hopping around the system in. Lots better. So, with the efficiency there, you could actually travel between Ceres and Mars most of the time within a week. So, you go from taking months to travel between planets to weeks. It was a big step. They were also more efficient. So, very useful. All sorts of ways. Earth is recovering. However, they do form the United Earth Government. It's not all happy camping, but it's a little bit better. Oops, sorry. Little burp. Wow. My sinuses want to act up, and so does my stomach. I'm having a great night. However, the UEG is better than the UN. It's more centralized and has more authority. And my music. What are you doing? Here we go. Under the influence of Ceres and Mars in particular, but usually with people from Earth, they also set up aerostats, little floating structures on Venus. Because the upper levels of Venus are actually sort of habitable. They're not crushing or super hot. So, you can actually have a floating station that orbits, I can't call it orbit, but, sails across the sky on Venus. And they start making a few. There's also a habitat on Luna, so our moon. Our moon is habitable, at least to a degree. Most of it's underground, except for the space docks. They have their own space docks, and Ceres had to help them out when fighting on Earth got kind of bad, sadly. In 2102, so it's been a few years, the asteroid belt is plagued by miners, people who want to get rich, trying to, find resources in the asteroid belt and shuttle it back, mostly to Earth. However, Ceres claims the entire asteroid belt as their own, and they begin patrolling it. So, most of this continues. However, At that point, or at least a couple years later, an experimental vessel is completed at the lunar shipyards, and it's sent to the edge of the system to conduct tests. It's a joint project, the first one ever, between the United Earth government, Ceres, and Mars, and built in lunar orbit. Ceres had come up with an experimental drive meant possibly to be the first faster than light drive. It's based on what most people would probably call warp theory. The idea that you create a bubble that sort of propels your ship forward without actually moving it in real space. At least, not directly. So your vessel kind of falls into the new bubble as you create new ones. It becomes the first linear, faster than light drive. Linear because it goes in a straight line. You can't turn with it. The reason why is actually because the sensors can't act faster than light. So you can't really see as you travel. This is kind of a problem. The first vessel, though, is a success. It flies out to a light year and then flies back. Test concluded. This leads to the first interstellar FTL flight. The Panoia, which is the name of the experimental vessel, flies all the way to Alpha Centauri, which is pretty close to us. It's about, I believe, 4 light years. I'll double check that. I actually have that number in here. Or I don't. Pretty sure I do, though. Oh, wait. 4.37 light years. So yeah, 4 light years. I knew I had it. I did a lot of research for this. They don't find habitable planets, but they do travel back to Earth. Using that as a sample, 2 years later, the Nanjing is made. It's kind of built kind of like the spaceship that you see in the Avatar movie. So, if you've seen that movie, you sort of know what the ship looks like. It's pretty long. That's the first one. And they start mapping solar systems and how they link together, creating routes that one can travel. The drives need to cool after a certain amount of time. This is called their fixed distance. And different vessels have different cooling methods, and their engines are a little bit different. So some drives are better than others. But early on, they're all kind of the same. So they can travel about 5 light years total. So each time they go from system to system, they need to basically find a 5 light year or less path between the two. That's a straight line. Hence why they create routes. One of the early colonies is a place that gets known as Aries. The system is not particularly habitable. In fact, it's like a death trap. Aries is a red dwarf system and is 15 light years away from Earth. So, about 3 to 4 jumps, depending on where you start from. However, it is one of the closer stars to us. The system, though, is pretty bad. Pretty bad. Planet Aries is... Come on, I know I have it somewhere. It is classified as a super Earth. However, it's more like Mars. It's not really habitable. At least not easily. And it's very erratic. So, it has a lot of tidal forces that work on it. And it's relatively cold. There's also the planet Damocles, which is a gas giant, I believe. Yes, is a gas giant. There's Adrestia, and it's very far out. However, somewhere here. Oh yeah, it is another gas giant. It's actually about 2.25 times the mass of Jupiter. So it's almost a second star. But not quite. Not quite. Heron, though, is another planet that is of particular interest. It's like Uranus in our system. So kind of far out as well. The big thing for Aries, though, is that it's full of material. Useful material in abundance. Carbons, so lots of crystals. In fact, diamond surface in some cases. So, a company ends up buying the rights to settle a colony there, hoping to make it rich. And they want to become a max manufacturing. Massive manufacturing facility. So, factories and other buildings, all built out there, 15 light years away. But, it's only a couple of months to actually travel there. So, it's not so bad. Not so bad. There's a bunch of other colonies set up right around the same time. The Far Isle Company sets up another corporate colony world. The Tantalus System is established by Frigate, the same company that did mining in the asteroid belt earlier on. Tantalus is an interesting system. It's a protostar. So, it's not really a protostar. There's actually a star there. But the system is a protosystem. Basically, that means none of the planets have formed yet. There's just huge, massive clouds of dust, basically, in rocks that are forming together by the pull of their gravity, collectively. It's hard to navigate, but it's got a lot of raw material. Fresh from the oven of its own star. Because the way a system forms is actually by the ejected material from usually a supernova, and it collects down and condenses into planets over millions of years. Some other colonies get started at Tau Ceti, Delta Pavonis. These have habitable worlds. Eta Cassiopeia has another colonizable world. Another group travels to Ross 248. They have their own colony, and they are another sort of semi-corporate sort of colony. They are the Pan-Asian Code Propriety Sphere, or PACS, which is a lot easier to say. They were a group pioneered by Asian companies, hence the name. But they get established as well. This all takes part over about 20 years. There's a couple other colonies too, like New Jerusalem, which is actually an Islamic colony. Probably radical to our eyes, but they wanted to get away from the issues in the Middle East. So they buy passage to a new system and form their own colony. Comfy little place with a desert. Not too bad though. It's, habitable. Mostly at the poles, unless you want to live in a desert though. That's the case in a lot of places. There's a lot of desert worlds spread around. A few ships get missing during this time, and you might hear about those later. I'm going to skip them for now. However, during this time, there's a period of about another 20 years, not until 2021, sorry, not 2021, that was last year, 2163, where the first case of interstellar piracy happens. Yeah, get pirates. Mostly because the trade routes become very common, and, people being people, the easiest way to make money is to often take it from others. So, they built sort of fighter vessels, little one-person ships, and they used transports to ship them around. And they would go and raid freighters, telling them to heave to, or they would let loose with their fighters. So, this becomes a big issue, because you have these trade networks that supply all the goods between the colony worlds and our system. Sol, which is actually the name of our system, if you never knew that, because our sun is not called Sun, it is called Sol. Yeah, space facts. But, at this point, piracy becomes kind of common. Lots of places are doing it, and the colonies don't really have, the ability to produce ships of their own. Well, some are starting to, but they're in the early stages, not like Mars or Luna, which have shipyards and make most of the vessels at this point in time. Because of this, the UEG in particular has been taxing colony worlds, mostly because they start making ships that are combat capable and they send them out into the stars to guard the trade routes. As such, they feel they deserve a cut of the profits, so they charge the colony worlds for their protection. This goes on for about 40 years, because in 2205, after 42 years of taxation by the UEG, the colony worlds get kind of annoyed. Especially some of them were developing their own economies at this point. And because of that, they ran into a problem. The taxation was so high that they were finding it hard to establish their own economy without dealing with the UEG. As such, they decide to declare their independence. At the start, only a couple of colonies, but UEG gets kind of mad at this. They've actually been making money off of this. I mean, billions and trillions of dollars worth of goods were being sent back to Earth from all the colony worlds. So, they've been living fat on all the colony resources and not having to really do too much by that point. You know, they'd hamper pirates and guard trade routes, but they didn't really do a heck of a lot. And piracy actually never stopped. Pirates just got more cunning and moved their bases of operations. So, they didn't really solve the problem, and after 40 years, the colonies had enough. There was a lot of graft in the system the UEG maintained as well. A lot of the officials within the government were making billions of dollars. They were some of the richest people on the planet. All because of this taxation of the colonies. As such, these people were powerful and rich, and they had no desire to give up all these riches that they had. And so, 2205 marks the beginning of the Colony Rebellion. Yeah, where the UEG sends their fleets, which are now decently massive, out into the colonies, which have no, military feats. They have freighters and merchant vessels, and a handful of other vessels. Ceres, which built up their own space forces. Oh, I forgot a step. Sorry. But I will finish Ceres first. So Ceres has its own more limited, non-FTL space forces for the most part. Barring one ship design, which goes on to become one of the most famous. It's a frigate, which is a smaller vessel, called the Rakshasa, named after the Indian legend of demons. It is a decently complex, fairly small crewed vessel. That's not terribly big. Their drive isn't all that great, for FTL at least, but they're a stealth vessel meant to hide and stalk their prey in the stars. Ceres sends out one of what they figure at least is their best captains in ships with just 36 people. Initially, they do this to give the colony worlds a little head start, to let them know that the UEG is coming. But they create the Ceres Corsairs, mostly because they can't get back to Ceres. The UEG comes in and they can't get back home. So they go sort of independent. Ceres sneaks a lot of material into them and technologies as the years go on. But the Rakshasa, captained by a particular character, let me find her name. I do have it written down because she's kind of famous. Sophia Lynn. Sophia Lynn is the captain of... What's the name of her ship? I know I have it somewhere. The Renault. A lot of their vessels have French names, so it's the Renault. She becomes the head of the Ceres Corsairs, and they fight against the UEG on the side of the colony worlds. However, I forgot to mention Mars. A lot of UEG ships were made at Mars, and when the colonies go independent, Mars sides with the colonies. This is kind of how they got independence. At this point, about 100 years before that. So, they have a vested interest in the colonies becoming independent. Well, because of this, they tell the UEG they will not make any more ships for them. At least not military ships. As the biggest producer of UEG combat vessels, this does not sit well with the UEG. So, the UEG sends their fleets to Mars. They plow through the defenses of Mars, and they take over all the shipyards and invade the planet. That is actually what sets off Ceres to send out Sophia Lynn and the Renault to give warning to the colonies, because obviously the UEG is coming. They just need to secure their production lines. And once they do, they send their fleets. Early on, the colonies get kind of crushed. They don't really have, any, good tech. The UEG has two types of frigates, the Vanguard Heavy Frigate and the Ranger Frigate, which is smaller. The colonies have no frigates. So, I should probably mention, ship classes. So, you might wonder when I talk about frigates. The way it works is you have small craft. So things like fighters, shuttles, corvettes, barges, yachts. Most of these can't travel FTL, so they're all classed as small craft. Capital ships, though, ones that can travel FTL, start at frigates. There's light frigates, general frigates, and heavy frigates. Though, at this time, at the start of the war, light frigates were kind of unheard of. They hadn't been made pretty much since the early Tiger frigate that the US built before the corporate wars. Like 100 years before this point. So, they're doing their thing. Light frigates are more like sort of heavy corvette. They're a corvette, basically, that has an FTL drive. That's usually the difference between them. Frigates are a decent length. Most of them are, 100 feet or more long, with some heavy frigates being about 200 feet long. So, the size of a small skyscraper. I can't talk tonight. I really can't. But, for that size, most are pretty small still. Like, the Rakshasa only has 36 people on board. It's one of the smaller ones, though it's definitely not a light frigate. It's got heavy weapons, and the problem is, most of the equipment takes up most of the space. Which is sort of the problem, When all your space is taken up by equipment, there's not much space for people. But, yes, I'm gonna skip talking too much about these, at least for the moment. So, the next class of larger vessels are cruisers. Cruisers are sort of the mainline vehicles. They're roughly about the same size as a freighter or a transport, but they're geared for combat in other situations. Give me one sec. I need to use the bathroom. Hang on. Okay, I am back. So, cruisers come in light cruisers, just cruisers, heavy cruisers, and battle cruisers. So, the difference is usually what they do. Light cruisers are smaller and are meant as more general purpose vessels. They're good at a lot of tasks, but not as big and therefore not as expensive as larger vessels. But they're usually pretty capable, not so much as combat. They're less combat focused. Then you have full-size cruisers, which fill a variety of roles. Kind of like in Star Trek. The Constitution class did all sorts of stuff. They might ship cargo. Wow, still can't talk. And lots of other things. Heavy cruisers are not combat focused, but larger and more powerful, with more space usually. Battle cruisers are combat focused cruiser designs. So the same size, but a lot more powerful. At least in combat. During the Colony Rebellion, that's not so much a thing. At least initially, there aren't many of those designs. And there is one other type I should probably mention in here. There are destroyers. A destroyer is about the same size as a light cruiser, but they're geared specifically for combat. They sort of drop all the extra functions and go heavy on the weapons. So, they don't usually carry supplies or rescue people in trouble. They're there to fight things. But they're the same general size as a light cruiser. There's also carriers, specifically lighter carriers, or sometimes pocket carriers or escort carriers. Pocket carriers are usually like transports, FTL transports, and they go and convert them to carry fighters. Especially for the colony worlds, fighters come in really handy. Escort carriers are a little bit larger, but they're not well armed, so they have to follow other vehicles like frigates or cruisers and work in collaboration as part of, a fleet. Light carriers in general are usually a little bit of a mix. They have some weapons, usually light weapons, kind of like you might see on a frigate. So, much smaller vessels. Frigates are small compared to light carriers. Light carriers are more the size of cruisers. With the smallest probably being some pocket carriers, which can be the size of frigates, but those are kind of rare. I actually do have a few. When I get into the stories, I'll talk about some of the ships more. But this is an overview, the primer if you will. There's also what are sometimes called courier vehicles. These are types of transports that are not usually armed and have very small cargo capacity, but very large engines. They're meant to basically take data between one system and another. So, the biggest use of those is, especially during this era, Wow, I can't talk. Um, you can put a bank of computer servers in your limited cargo space and carry the equivalent of the internet between one date and another, from one system to another. And that's basically what couriers do. There's also larger vessels, but you only see one of those early on. Heavy capital ships do exist. Those are battleships and carriers. The first battleships are the Chukano, which is actually built by the Chinese Space Systems Company. And it's built pretty much as the UEG is founded. They wanted to do one last hurrah and project the Chinese ideology into space. It's given over to the UEG, but it has no FTL, and it gets kind of carried around without really being used until you might see it later. You might see it. But these vessels are much larger than even cruisers, like twice the size, and are usually heavily armed. Carriers, though, are about the same size, but obviously they carry fighters. They're massively large and are meant to carry shuttles and other small craft. So you have some that are assault carriers. These ones carry shuttles and are meant to transport ground assault forces. Or defensive, you never know. Mostly assault, though. Hence the name. But yeah, they carry troops between worlds. There's also fleet carriers, kind of like our modern fleet carriers, like, the Enterprise sailing around, doing its own thing, leading a fleet of ships. Usually, at least when these are introduced, there aren't very many ships of this size. So, what happens is that the biggest ships usually lead a fleet. So if you have some frigates and a light cruiser, the light cruiser is usually the lead ship. But, if you have a battleship is the lead to cruisers and frigates. But I'm getting distracted. I could talk about ships for a long time, but I felt I had to talk about the size of ships. So, the Colony Rebellion begins in 2205, and it ends in 2226. Because by this point, the colony fleets, led by the series Corsairs, which now have several different vessels as part of it. All Rakshasa frigates. They enter Seoul for the first time in like 20 years. Sophia Lin is back in her home system. 20 years of fighting. Sounds so long. But, yeah, takes a while to move around, which is why the fighting took so long. When it takes you a couple of months to get from one system to another, that's how things go. But, yeah, when the colony fleets come in, the UEG ends up surrendering without actually fighting. A few renegade UEG officers take their vessels and fly out of the system, but most stand down. Something similar happens in the colony fleets. Basically, some people don't want to give up fighting Earth, so they want to continue the fight, and they leave the fleet as well. The remainder end up getting combined together to create the Systems Alliance. The Systems Alliance is something like the Federation in Star Trek. The idea is each solar system gets one seat in the Systems Alliance Council. And the Council deals with situations between the stars. The SAN, the Systems Alliance Navy, or SAN, and the Systems Alliance Marines, or SAM, become formed at this point. However, it takes a while for the forces to get together, and they do a big fleet inventory and decide, what vehicles they're going to use going forward, which are getting retired and sent back to their homeworlds. But the Systems Alliance takes over, and the character that I will be doing more stories on, Caitlyn Shepherd. She is from 2239, so she is 13 years after the end of the Colony Rebellion. She's actually born, I believe. No, 39 is when she's born. So 13 years after the Colony Rebellion ends is when Caitlyn is born. And in 2255, Caitlyn attends the Systems Alliance Navy Officers Academy, which is a mouthful. A little bit shorter when you call it SONOA. Acronyms are great. But she's going to be our main character. I have stories for Sophia Lynn and even the original Discovery crew. But I'll tell those some other time. They're not as well developed. But yeah, our story is set in 2255 and will follow Caitlyn as she graduates from school. Well, I guess technically it's 2261 because she has to actually graduate before we get to really see her. But I think that's enough story time for tonight. I think it's enough. So, I'm gonna look and see who's on. I know this is kind of short, but my voice is going. I didn't really intend to give, Kami Storytime tonight. It's just because, we weren't gonna have a full stream. Let's see. Oh, we have not rated Zen in a while. So let's go raid Zen. Oops. It helps if I can type right. That would help. So, we're gonna raid Zen. I hope you enjoyed the primer to, weird. My computer's acting weird. But I hope you enjoyed the first ever Kami Storytime. The primer. I'll do more eventually. I have stories. And, we'll get into some more character action. This is more background. I want to set the stage without having to repeat everything. So, yeah, we're gonna stop here tonight. So, I hope you enjoyed. I will see you tomorrow at 4 o'clock. 4 o'clock. Not so late. But have fun. Take care. And I will see you later. Bye.
Hey, how are you? Let's see. We're just gonna kind of grab my new minigun. Okay. There. Yeah. Yeah. Have you found it? Jesus Christ! Look at me! Oh my God! Thank you for the rain.